Welcome to PolicyWise. Today we've got, I guess you could call this a little roundtable discussion once again, throwing it back to our first ever episode for season 3. Michael's got a very, very special policy idea he wants to share with us. And we're going to be going around asking him some questions, getting some explanations. So yeah, with that being said, let's get into it.
Y'all might know me by this point. My name is Michael Wiafe. I've been hosting with PolicyWise for a while now. And I'm gonna finish my master's degree in a little bit over a month, which I'm so excited for, but excited to be here and talk about stuff.
I'm Demi, and I don't know, just check out the bio on the website for me, and I'm excited to be here and talk about Michael's policy today.
Do we have a website that has your bio on it?
I mean, probably like a fan website or something, right? Go to my personal website.
Everyone, go to Demi's LinkedIn. Expand her network. All right, well, I'm here. I'm Ellie. If you don't already know, if you haven't checked out one of the couple episodes I'm on, I'm a second year at Berkeley. I do a bunch of environmental stuff. That's most of what you need to know.
Hi, my name is Mehek, as you probably know since I've also been on the PolicyWise team for a while. I'm also a student at UC Berkeley. I believe I'm the third one out of the 4 of us, and I'm a freshman. I'm excited to talk today.
Woo! All right, y'all. Let's get right into it. So let's get into it. So you're gonna learn a little bit about me, and this is okay. Before we dive into it, I think lots of policy, if not all policy, is written from the perspective of the writer, right? Or is taken from a storyteller of some sort, in which maybe legislators or other policymakers might hear a story and develop some sort of solution to basically change the scenario so that stories like that do not happen again. And so as an aspiring, I guess, policymaker and thinking about what changes to the frameworks that we live by might need to be created, I have to draw on my own background and my own stories. It is, I think, my perspective, and it's very important for policies to also have audiences as they're being discussed and created, to bounce back ideas back off of, share other perspectives that may exist that maybe were not taken into account into the original design. And so if anything, this is like a test of a policy idea that I'm not going to say originated with me, although I would say that like I did original analysis into it, and not necessarily research, but just looking into what the effects might be, judging by what actions might have been taken in other jurisdictions, and maybe similar actions that might yield comparable results. If that might sound like a bunch of mumbo jumbo, I hope that makes sense pretty soon. So in order to really set the scene for what we're going to be talking about here, we got to take it back to me in 3rd grade. 8-year-old Michael was a menace. I'm just kidding. He was inquisitive. This was back in a time when this was back when I was very early on in my educational career, obviously, but up until 3rd grade, I was kind of a teacher's pet. I was a talker. I was asking questions. I'd hang out with the teacher at lunch. I'd, do all those kind of things until I got to 3rd grade. My 3rd grade teacher hated me for reasons I still don't know to this day, although I can hypothesize, wink, wink, nudge, nudge into what that might mean. So in 3rd grade, I would get detention almost every day. And every time, it was for like a different reason, or maybe she'd give me multiple days of detention at a time for reasons that really, like, now that I look back, were really petty. Like just very small things. I got sentenced to detention more in 3rd grade, more than I got to actually go to lunch and play with my friends on the playground. And I learned kind of by looking back that I think my 3rd grade teacher was finding ways to punish me because I think she thought of me as disrespectful. I think, just being candid, that a part of that must have come from the fact that I was the only black guy in the class, and potentially that those who have looked like me who came before me maybe gave her a bad taste. And this is exactly how prejudice and racism works. And so when I came in the class, she was immediately plotting. And so that made it that something as small as dropping a pencil, like it literally, if I drop my pencil, go down to pick it up, she would assume I'm doing something disruptive to the course or doing something that shouldn't be done in class, and I would literally get detention for dropping a pencil. I also remember somebody throwing a paper airplane at me from across the room. As a third grader, the only appropriate response when being thrown a paper airplane is to pick it up and throw it back. Anyway, so I picked it up and I threw it back, and I got in so much. I think I got like a whole week of detention for that. And the student who originally threw the paper airplane at me got nothing because I was told to be the bigger person and that I should have known not to throw it back. I got detention for asking questions that she thought was disrespectful. Mainly for me, it was just simply asking a question, which I still do ask a lot of. You know, that was my first time glimpsing into what is now known as the school to prison pipeline, where, you know, students who maybe look like me will get punished and consistently and constantly, and eventually it'll get elevated to like actual police, and now you basically get students who are maybe being a little bit more different in the classroom being punished even further in the actual penal system, making it so that great opportunities for higher education down the road are essentially decimated, and that really what we're getting at here is an implicit messaging, but in some ways could be very explicit, that the student does not belong in the classroom. That is what is being told. When you punish students, what you're telling them is your behavior was unwarranted, and when you take them out of the classroom for further punishment, you are telling them that they do not belong, even if the student is extremely capable. And they just have not been in an environment in which actually was conducive to their learning and shows their skills and shows their intelligence. I think if I was set on the same trajectory that I was coming out of second grade, I think I would be in a different place, although I don't know if that place would be better than it is now, because I think I learned a lot from my journey. But essentially that further sets the stage for what we're talking about here, and that's the implicit and explicit messaging that students get from K through 12 and how that might affect their college going habits. So if you've been told, let's say for me starting from third grade, implicitly, maybe this place isn't for you and these people don't understand you, and you consistently get that message growing up, middle school, high school, you get teachers who tell you you're not smart enough, you get teachers who tell you that college isn't for you, or they tell you that maybe, you know, I saw a tweet from Alex Padilla, kind of showing him telling a little bit of his story, that his teacher told him not to apply to MIT because they don't want him to be disappointed. Little things like that are telling students that this is not for you. And so the policy that I'm proposing is one that would actually look to change the way that the system works, and essentially move from a K through 12 to higher ed opt-in model to an opt-out model, saying that essentially right now, if you want to go to college, it's on you to apply. It's on you to do everything. It's not like, you know, middle school to high school where if you just exist, then they're going to say, here's your new class schedule, you know, see you soon. And what I'm proposing is that students who maybe got that implicit messaging and when they're seniors in high school, are they going to then opt in to apply for more schooling in which they've been told their entire lives that they don't deserve, or that they don't fit in, or that it's not for them and it's for the smart kids, the white kids, oftentimes. So what I'm proposing, it's a long roundabout way to get to it, but what I'm proposing is an automatic enrollment from high school to college in local community college. Basically saying when you're a senior in high school, if you do not opt out for one reason or another, either you have a full-time job already set up, you applied to a 4-year university, got in and plan to go, that you're going into the military, or some other reason as to why you wouldn't move on to higher education, that you receive a letter in the mail saying that you've gotten accepted with your fall schedule, and you are invited to an admittance day for your local community college and start classes in the fall. If a student chooses to drop out after they start classes, that's up to them. They're adults, they can choose what they want to do. But removing that first initial barrier to higher education would do wonders for the amount of students that are able to enter. And some of you might be wondering, well, why do they even need to do this? Like, the economy is not built for everybody to go to higher education, et cetera, et cetera. The economy's starting to go in that direction, in which you need to get a level of education in order to be successful for the most part. And if you don't, you have a higher likelihood of being in poverty than you do not. And so, we know that this is needed for the modern economy. California needs it. We are in deficit of nearly 1 million or slightly over 1 million bachelor's degree by 2030. And so we're gonna have to change the game if we need our economy to keep on growing in the same direction that we need to grow it in. Was that a good explanation of the policy? I'm gonna look to the group on the table.
Yeah, that was good. solid okay. Intro.
Okay. Yes. Wait, can I add just a little bit more?
So,
I'm so sorry.
Yeah, go for it.
I was just gonna say, because I'm like looking at, so for the listeners, I actually wrote a paper on it, and so I'm kind of like leaning on this very long paper, 20 pages or 20 pages double spaced. Like, imagine how many students who have had teachers all their lives that treated students as constant threats and distractions. They never expected or supported them to ascend to greater things. What this policy is looking to do is erode barriers that say, instead of "this is not for you," instead say "congratulations and welcome in." Just beyond the achievement effects, what it would do to increase the confidence and academic self-efficacy of students of color and low-income students who've never had anyone in the education system say "you belong here," providing them that first message that they belong. Cool. Okay, Ellie, please.
Yeah, no, that was great. I'm really curious, like, obviously, in my opinion, I think this is a great idea, and I think it would open doors to so many people who have felt like the doors have been just automatically closed to them no matter what they did. But I'm really curious what this will look like in practice. I mean, I know I took some city college classes, and I think even just that small number of classes I took, just the bureaucracy to even try to get involved in that, like, small amount was just, it really laid out to me how intense and crazy the process of enrollment can be if you're not even convinced that you want to go or would be supported if you go, and B, if like there's no one helping you through that process of trying to enroll. It's like a maze that's impossible. So I'm really excited as to hear about what this policy would look like in practice. Like, how exactly is it getting into the process of enrollment and making sure that people are automatically enrolled and like have everything that they need, and like how are people being I guess selected to like be admitted in, like how are they identifying who already has something set up for themselves, or is it just a blanket thing, everyone automatically gets admitted into community college and then you have to opt out even if you've already been accepted somewhere else? I guess, yeah, if you could just enlighten us as to what this would look like in practice.
Yeah, these are great questions. And it would require what I call bone breaking the bones of the current infrastructure. Right now, we rely on a few people to facilitate this: high school counselors, college admissions counselors, and enrollment folks. Right now, those are 3 different groups of people. What I think what would need to happen in order to move towards this model would be consolidating these 3 groups of people into one cohesive unit. And so some high school counselors would then be very iterative, be very in touch with the students. What I imagine is, let's say January of your senior year, for us, it was our English class in the Redlands Unified School District, where like if everybody were to get a message, like everything happened in English because everybody had to take English. And so in your English class, you would just get a little form that says, "Hey, what are you doing? What's your plan?" And let's say a student's just like, "Oh, I applied to 4 years and I hope to go." Cool. We'll check in with you right before you graduate. A student says, "I'm not sure yet." Okay. Well, now we know that that's somebody that we'll have to work with to get them college admission. Not even get them. It's automatic. Like, it's already going to be there. But just put them in the process, send it over to the community college and say, "Hey, this is a student that's going to be coming in, or we plan for them to come in." Student can check it and say, "Hey, military." Be like, "All right, cool." And maybe we'll have connections to you'll get them connected to the military in that way. Or you'll have somebody else that says, "Oh, my family has a business and I'll be working there." Cool. Enjoy. Go on your way. And then from that, what I'm imagining, and this is kind of also building on, there's multiple times in this conversation we're going to talk about current policy that exists, in which is going to serve as kind of like a foundation for this to stand on. One of them, at least in the state of California, is the California Cradle to Career Data System. That is just about getting off the ground, but it's linking data, it's basically linking data structures. The way that it currently exists is like when you go from elementary school to middle school, your school district has that info. Where that breaks out is when you go from high school to college, your college is not linked to the high school district. But if we link that data, it would be as simple as that data just moving on to college. You have all the classes they've already taken. You know what classes they need. It's a matter of just asking the student, and it doesn't even have to be when they're seniors in high school. They have time to pick their major, and just saying, we know that you need these general education classes within your first 2 years, whatever major you go into. Which classes do you want to take? Here are your options. And just here's your new schedule. It's basically linking the data that we already have. This is one thing that I hated about applying to college, is I'm telling these people information they should already know. And like,
it was so stressful too. I was filling out those applications and they were like, what class did you take? And I'd be like, oh, this is what it says on the schedule. This is what it says on my transcript. Am I going to be like, are you going to think I took something else if I write it this way, or like whatever? And all the A through G requirement stuff. It was a mess. It was so stressful. And like, that was me applying like with all my friends doing the same thing, with my parents helping me out, like always bugging my high school counselor. Like, the current system is just ridiculous.
Like, you have my transcript. You asked for it.
No, it's so like, why do I have to fill it out by hand? Yeah, no, it was crazy.
So that data already
for
exists.
Everything, yeah.
I will add on to that. It's not very uniform either, and so colleges don't even necessarily consider the fact that there weren't all these classes available at every high school, and the classes that were available are often a reflection of the resources that high school had, which is frustrating, but I also think adds to the point that you're trying to make of why a newer system is needed. Because if you couldn't afford to have as many AP classes in your school district, then colleges should know that, and they shouldn't penalize you for it.
Absolutely.
I will say, I have a question, but also I will say on this that the CSU, at least like through CSU Fresno, actually was really good about this. So I have to give props to them in the sense that like it went way too smooth. I almost was like, oh my gosh, just like the hassle of going through what I know other people are going through going to UCs. I was like, oh, this is awesome. So just like a small shout out there, because that was nice. I do have like several questions, Michael, and yeah, thank you for sharing your story, and then also going into a bit of the detail on the policy itself. I guess there's like a couple questions that I have on like the logistics front. And I think some of us can like assume these answers. So to get like more in depth, like how do you feel like 4 years will play into this? Like, could you imagine the UC and the CSU system being like, we actually want to join in on this automatic enrollment? We want to provide for like a certain subset of students, or do you only see the CSU and the UC and like other private schools maybe going through just pulling directly from community colleges?
Yeah, that's a good question. I see them pulling directly from community colleges. I know that there are some of these that exist currently in terms of college promise programs. And so I would imagine that what might happen, this is off the fly. What I imagine what might happen is like, let's say the top 15% of students from school districts might get automatic enrollment to the 4-year. But I think for the majority of students, those who would not, for the most part, would not already have a plan, because if you're in the top 15%, more likely than not, you are already looking at Stanford. You know what I mean? Like, you're already looking at universities that maybe are not by you, like where you live. And that's not the case for everybody, but like for the most part, those are the students that already have things figured out. And so they might not even be a part of this when it, like, who actually will benefit from this, I doubt will be the top students. Although there likely will be some. So I imagine them playing a small role, but I think what they're going to be focused more so on is looking back towards the original design of California's higher education system, which is that they receive the transfers. And so that all the students who are going to be starting out at their community college are going to have to transfer within 2 years. And so I think the 4 years need to make a lot more space for that. It would be focused more there.
Okay, I have a question. So I am curious, I guess I'm curious, like what the current examples of this are. I know you mentioned that this is being implemented in some places. I think Idaho is one place that's either currently implementing or thinking about implementing this. But I'm curious, obviously community colleges, maybe this is a little bit different with like the possibility for remote learning, and I guess that's a whole other thing we could talk about in a different episode. But what about the capacity issues of community colleges? Like, how can we guarantee everyone's able to get enrolled into this institution and also make sure classrooms aren't like severely overcrowded, we're not understaffed, we have enough like personnel to support this? Does the current structure of the community college system in California, would it be able to accommodate the influx of more students, presumably, if everyone's automatically enrolled? Would it be able to do that as it currently stands, or like what changes need to be made before this could be actually implemented?
I think this one is a massive question mark, but I will do my best to hypothesize. In one way, absolutely not. They're not ready for this. But I think that they are trying to be. And so I think that there are still movements that might need to be made to accommodate that level of influx of students. I also think that once the 4 years get on board with accepting more transfers and thinking more about that is a big part of it, where you have students that are taking up seats at community colleges for 3, 4, 5, 6 years because they're unable to transfer out. And so if they have those transfer out abilities, then there would be more seats at community colleges. We also know that after the pandemic, community college enrollment dipped quite a bit. A lot of 4 years saw increases. Public 4 years specifically saw increases. A lot of privates and community colleges saw enrollment drops. And so, like, theoretically, there's a lot more space for that than there would have been a few years ago. I also think that with a more guaranteed source of students, that there is better financial planning that might occur, and that would facilitate a larger amount of growth. There's also a lot of support services that go into it that also make, college systems more expensive. My thought is by, kind of imagine how much administrative burden will get alleviated by a lot of admissions counselors. Like, there's going to be a lot more space, I think, created within financial structures to make facilitating more students make a lot more sense. Those are just a few thoughts, and I'm sure we'll get to an affordability conversation for students at some point. But, I don't think they're ready for it yet, but I think they're planning for it. And I think that there's movements that are already being made in that direction to create space.
Kind of off that, like, off Ellie's point, and just like taking a greater focus on some of the counter arguments. Out of different counter arguments that you've heard against this, like, what do you think is the most convincing? And then, of course, what's your response to that?
Oh, wow. What I think is the most convincing. I think they're all somewhat convincing. Like, I understand them all and I agree with them all. I'll start with the one that's least convincing and then work my way up. The one that's least convincing is people don't need education. Please don't come at me with that. Don't do it. It's just, I will blow you out the water. Like, you know what I mean? The data's there. The data's clear. Like, higher education is the one way to get people out of poverty. Higher education, career technical education, like, these are the things that improve people's lives. And is, other than getting married, is the one single most tried and true way to pull somebody out of poverty. Give them a college degree. Bam. I think now that I think the most, I think you already brought up the most convincing counter argument, which is there's no space. I think that's the most convincing counter argument to me. But I just was able to kind of scroll through the paper, and community colleges saw 15% enrollment drop in the state of California. So, just kind of putting a number to what I was saying about an enrollment drop. I think another convincing counter argument is that, look, students already don't have enough support. What makes you think that adding the amount of students that would need more support, like, right, the students who benefit from the policy would need more support. Simply put, would need more support. I think that what it would actually do as well is how I'm going to address that counter argument is I think by adding a large amount of students that need more support, the support that currently exists will become more solidified. I think it'll become more campuses will be more ready for the students that they are receiving, rather than, kind of assuming that the students that they receive are one way or another. It's just like, oh, we know we're going to get, low income students who have been told their whole lives that this isn't for them. So why don't we create all the structures that are needed for them to exist? Versus now we're, people are starting to have that conversation when it should have happened a long time ago. And the reality is that these students have been here just about the entire time. Ellie brought up Idaho and one of some of the other jurisdictions doing similar movements. So Idaho kind of has a little bit of a different structure. Of course, there are ways to improve it. I think they had a great place to start, but they have a tiered system, actually. And so if you're a student with a certain GPA, then you're considered, let's say, top tier. Then you get admission to the top universities, like University of Idaho, maybe Idaho State University, I think is maybe tier 2. These are all off the top of my head. So, I'll have to pull up, some more details around this. But basically, if you are in the bottom tier, then it's community college. Some of the results that they saw of this, and it's only been a few years, it includes a 3.1 increase in overall college enrollment across 2- and 4-year institutions, a 6.7% increase in the number of high school graduates immediately enrolling in college, an 88% increase in applications to college completed, and a 6% cumulative enrollment increase all across the board, and a 3% decrease in students who left Idaho for college. And some of you might be wondering, why was applications mentioned? My policy kind of gets rid of the application process. But Idaho's essentially says, look, you're in this tier, you gain automatic enrollment. We just need you to fill out this application. And so they still required them to fill out applications, but they saw an 88% increase in applications completed to college. And this, when I was thinking about this policy, it was specifically for the region which I grew up in, which is the Inland Empire, which is about 60 miles east of LA, closer to the desert. And one of the major issues within the Inland Empire is that the best and brightest leave. That is if you talk to anyone and ask what's the biggest issue about the workforce, it's that people who have opportunity do not stay. And so that statistic around a decrease in students who left, that's also an important statistic for certain regions that tend to not have resources or get overlooked when it comes to certain policy decisions.
And just to clarify on that, is part of the reason, is it beneficial because community colleges are so much, there's so many more community colleges and they're often more localized to individual communities, that going to a community college actually keeps people within the same region?
I actually don't know. I can't think of why that might be the thing. What I would imagine is let's say again, you're one of the top students, top 10, 15, 20% maybe, and you're thinking about college and you're oh, I want to go there. I used to be like that too. Mm-hmm. My dream college for a lot of the high school years was actually Ohio State, because I loved the Ohio State marching band. But when it came down to it and I actually applied and saw how expensive it would be for me to leave the state, it was actually maybe I won't. But maybe some other students don't actually look at what it might be like to be in the state and don't get that letter of saying you're automatically admitted to actually this pretty good university that's in state and it's going to be affordable. If you don't get explicitly told that and you're already dreaming out of state, what's stopping you?
Right.
It basically gives them an option. It gives a competitive option.
Yeah. Something that you mentioned earlier, or I at least think it relates to what you're saying earlier, is something that's being rolled out at the University of Michigan. I'm not sure and everyone's familiarity with it, but the idea is instead of providing automatic enrollment, they provide basically automatic, or they send information to students who would have a good chance of getting into the University of Michigan from like high and low and middle income backgrounds. And it's a randomized control trial, so they're testing it across different groups. But basically, they sent a letter out to students who qualify, and those who were more likely to, those who received like a letter which basically said like you would get a full ride scholarship, which basically it's all financial aid, so it's like wasn't even University of Michigan paying for it. It was just saying like you're gonna get this full scholarship, increased enrollment like tenfold. So it's also like an interesting kind of, I guess like sister policy that would be interesting to look into as well. And obviously this is something, potentially a way that 4 years could like get involved in this policy. But we could link the paper. I think it's like a working paper at this point to this thing in the description of our episode. But it is really, really interesting. And what it really relates to what you were saying earlier is that because this policy, because your policy is in place, that it'll be like the systems will become more prepared for students from diverse backgrounds. And what they've actually seen in the Michigan study is that students who are coming from like first generation backgrounds have like come together to like formulate like their own like resource center. And so it like just like demonstrates that like having that representation is going to, you know, multiply the amount of resources available to students of those backgrounds, which I think supports your point earlier.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. I think it's interesting that Michigan is doing that. And I think you brought up something interesting as well, which was the affordability piece. I think you brought up a scholarship and thinking about the funds. I didn't consider it a counter argument, but I can be considered a counter argument of like, well, these students who don't have resources, who've been told that they don't, you know, et cetera, how the heck are they going to pay for this? Like, you're putting a unfunded cost on the student by putting them into community college, because we don't have universal free community college, but we do. There's a lot of resources available. This is kind of paired with thinking through some of the policies leading in California that haven't been enacted just yet, but are starting to move in the direction of requiring every high school graduate to fill out the FAFSA. What this is going to do is put every student that's at, or FAFSA, CADA, AB 540 students, like put them in a position to where they will receive aid from the federal government, meaning that if any of them are considered low income, they will all get the Pell Grant, and we'll kick the ball over to the federal government to deal with it, since that's I forgot the policy term for it. It's a mandated policy. It's like a entitlement. That's what it is. It's an entitlement, meaning if you qualify, you get it. That's that. So all the students that qualify will get it. The second piece is California has actually enacted the California Promise, which just about guarantees the first 2 years of community college to be free if you qualify, which a lot of students do. And so with federal support, with Pell Grant plus Cal Grant, you kind of already being out there, with DACA recipients, AB 540 funding, DREAM Act, like with all of these things coming into play, for the most part, this is going to be free for the most part for the students that need it. The students who will have to pay will likely be those who do not need it. And community college, in comparison to 4 years, is, you know, much more affordable. And so even that is going to be a small lift for most. And I think that that's even going to get ironed out as institutions receive these students, whoever might be left out of all of these resources. I think those will come to light. But I think it's a pretty tightly woven net of support that currently exists. And by putting this policy on top of it, we would require expansion of those supports, but we would have a much more educated workforce in existence, which would grow the economy, I think, tenfold. And that would be in community college, not community colleges. That would be in communities that tend to not have educated workforces, to build out more opportunities and higher paid opportunities and present a lot more chances for mobility, which comes with usually a degree. Yeah.
Okay, so I feel like this would be like, I don't know. I feel like this would be someone's counter argument. Um and I would just like love to hear your response to it. And that would be that the value of like a 2-year degree and even a 4-year degree would somehow be less, it would become less valuable because it's become saturated because so many people now have it. What are your feelings as far as that goes, and not just like valuable in the sense of like the actual skills gain, and like your competitiveness in the job market, but just like general perception around the quality of these degrees?
Yeah, I think that's a common argument, right? Like, oh, it's gonna make my degree worthless. Um, a degree is not a free pass. It is not a, you know, it is not the golden ticket. A degree says that you've taken a certain level of classes, that you've been in a certain space for long enough, and that you're qualified to do some type of work. There's still going to be a lot that comes into it. You're going to have to get work experience. You're going to have to get, other professional experiences in order to be competitive in the market. And I think generally that argument, and I'd love to be corrected if anybody wants to differ with me on this, I think that argument to me is rooted in the tie to those who receive a college degree tend to look like and come from certain backgrounds, and you put those together and you assume that those are the people who are deserving because they work hard, or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, when in reality those are the people who've had opportunity for the most part a lot of their lives, and therefore, like, oh, you're going to put those people at a disadvantage. It's like, no, we're actually leveling the playing field and making it so you actually have to try and you actually have to be good at what you do to get to the top of the income bracket, and that's currently not the economy we have.
I also kind of feel like that's like a shut the door behind me mentality. Like, oh, I put the work in to get my degree, da da da. No one else gets a free pass to do that, and it's just like, I don't know. It's a lame response in my opinion. I feel like educating as many people as possible is good for everyone. And so yeah, Michael, I agree with you that argument doesn't hold water the way I think some people want it to.
No, I totally agree. It's interesting because I think if you really think about the like different arguments that exist against providing more education, it's really, there's like 5 of them. And if we could, you know what I mean? There's like 5 arguments that come every single time, and there's ideological differences that take place on either side. And at the end of the day, people are making a decision between being exclusionary and elitist versus being, inclusive and like progressive on it. So I think, the response that you have to that, I think, can definitely be leveraged in like a lot of different situations where you're arguing for the expansion of quality education. So great. I did have another question, and I wanted to get back kind of to like the root of the policy in the first place, which is to, get at the kind of like the implicit and explicit pushes that certain people get away from, going to college or like other, academically prosperous routes. What other policies do you think could fill or like complement this current one, and like really tackling that issue?
I think that there's a lot there. The biggest one that comes to mind, is affirmative action, Prop 16 from 2020. What we're going to need to do is change the faculty, administration, staff on college campuses to reflect the new diversity. Right now, we don't have the policies in place in order to actually make that happen, and actually create the support that's needed for a lot of these students to come onto the campuses and hit the ground full running in their fullest potential and be able to achieve that full potential.
I agree. And then I also feel like I feel like I get even more discouraged and then also like passionate about the weeding out before college, which happens due to the things that we're talking about now with like terrible third grade teachers, and like administration on that level, and like the opportunities that exist in K through 12, which just, yeah, perpetuate all of this. And I think your policy does actually a really fine job at like getting at such a key bridge between those two major issues.
It came from something I had actually heard somebody else kind of start referring to. Didn't necessarily name it or put all the details in place or do the research or any of that, but I was like, what if we were to try that out? What might that policy model actually look like? Another jurisdiction that I'll bring up did something similar was West Sacramento. Although they didn't do to the extent that Idaho did, which Idaho calls it direct admissions. Actually, let me talk about Idaho a little bit more for a second, only because I found a brand new article fresh off the presses last month, actually, which is more recent than when I did the paper. It said direct admissions. So these are new stats to the ones that I added earlier. Direct admissions raised first-time undergrad enrollments by over 8% and in-state student enrollment by almost 12%. And that is how it affected enrollment in 2017 to 2018. So even that data is, because it usually takes a while to really analyze data, and you have to wait for certain things to come into place. So anyway, that's looking at that data just to see the impacts more further down the line. West Sacramento didn't have kind of as detailed. All they literally did was send a letter to every graduating senior saying congratulations on your graduation and your acceptance to Sacramento City College. They just sent the letter from the mayor and like jointly signed by the mayor and I think like the superintendent of the school district and I think like the like superintendent of the community college. And they haven't analyzed the data yet, and so don't have numbers yet, but it has been reported that they've reported that it's expected to yield positive results, and they plan to continue to expand the program. This is just through probably talking to students and seeing preliminary data, not reportable data, but preliminary. They are already hoping to expand the program and put more details to it, and that's yielding positive results. Another thing, I actually heard about this morning, so great timing to the scheduling of our recording. This morning, I heard Long Beach has something very similar, that the city of Long Beach has started to go down kind of a Long Beach Promise program. Basically, if you're in high school, you get, kind of admission to the community college. And if you are in, certain positionality within the community college, automatic admission to Long Beach State. Which is a really good CSU, one of the top CSUs. And so, there is more and more of this kind of popping out of the woodwork. I also saw the San Bernardino Promise. I saw some, Cal State San Bernardino has some partnerships with some high schools in the district to make that happen and get their top percentage. But so we're seeing this pop out of the ground, but doing it at a much wider scale, I think would do wonders to the economy. Last thing I'll mention on your question around, like what other opportunities might exist, work-based learning. I think we're going to see a lot more, like, because think about it, if we do this, that means you're going to have a lot less high school graduates coming out ready for the workforce. And so a lot of the low experience, generally low wage jobs that exist will no longer have people to fulfill that, which I would say is a good thing, because those jobs tend to be a little on the predatory side, but not always. Somebody got to do them, right? And so what I think might happen here is the modernization of technology might occur, technology taking over some of that and being able to pay folks more for the good work that they're doing, but then also being able to get students and say, okay, you're in school now, but let's provide you with a work-based learning opportunity. It's actually going to pay you a living wage, but where you're actually going to be able to go back to these places and maybe have a little bit more stake in the work that you're doing, but also have it tie into what you're learning in the classroom. I think that that's an opportunity that exists to kill two birds with one stone, get people in the classroom, get them still to work, still be getting, a little bit better of an income than they maybe would have had without that college attached, but still keeping the current economy that we have up and running and pushing to advanced technology at the same time.
Yeah. No, it's really interesting. And I think like looking at the UK right now, there's been like a huge push for apprenticeships for like jobs that, specifically require more experience than like more hands-on work than maybe like in a classroom work. And I mean, it'll like time will tell how this all turns out, but I do think it's like it's an interesting concept. I need to learn more about it honestly, but like but it is like I feel like it's a viable way forward and something like a lot more people would consider. And I think it'll take like it'll take like a lot of effort, in the sense that I think like college as a social incubator gets like very idealized sometimes as well. So like going and like not doing college and maybe like doing an apprenticeship alternatively, like there needs to be like some kind of like, it needs to be like amped up in the same way. Similar with community colleges. I think, you know, if people are considering going to community colleges versus 4 year, I think like that college experience is something that like is often deterred, and like it genuinely needs to be a focus of policy solutions, you know, putting more money into community colleges, putting more money into, you know, making it a good experience for students.
Going back to what you were talking about your experiences in third grade, and other examples of similar in terms of goals, policies that you've seen. I was wondering what kind of collaboration you'd like to see at an elementary school level, at a middle school level, to help students get to the point where when they're leaving high school, they're ready for automatic enrollment. Because there's a lot of issues in the system, even before we get to high school, that need to be fixed.
Yeah. You know, I think that's a really good question. I look back on those experiences, and like the reality is I never recovered as a student from that. Like it was like I was, you know, considered one of the top in the class. Third grade, I dipped to the bottom and never made my way back up to the top. And I think my care about school just like went right out the window. Like from third grade to like grad school. From third grade to like grad school, I cared a lot more about like what I was doing outside of the classroom than I did what I was doing in the classroom. And even now, I'm still not the best. And so what I would imagine is once the system realizes that every single student is gonna have to be ready for college, I think what we're gonna stop doing is this tiered system in K through 12 that currently exists, where, you know, you got the GATE or like the honors students that might be considered honors. Like you go into those classrooms, and I was a student. They called me a bubble student, which is basically like I'm in the middle, like I'm on the verge. Like I was in some honors classes, but not all of them. I cared about.
Did they actually call you a bubble student? Like officially?
Yes, I was.
That's wild.
I was in 8th grade when I got a little. You know, when we get those little slips to the principal's office. I got a little slip to the principal's office where I talked to some administrator. I think she was the assistant principal, and she called me to my face a bubble student, where she said like, you're smart, you show that, you take honors classes here and there, but you're like, why aren't you trying harder? Essentially was her question. And she called me bubble student, like I'm on the bubble. I to my face. Which back then I didn't care. I wouldn't say that conversation like did anything to me. I was like, yeah, sounds about right. But I think once we actually start treating every single student like they're gonna go to college, the game will change. Because right now we don't do that. We tier out students. We say those ones are for sure going to college, those ones aren't, and we treat those two groups differently. And I say that because I was in both, and I remember being in the honors classes, and the teachers are talking like, when you're in college, this is how it's going to be, or you need to do this to prepare for college, or in college. And when I was in like the non-honors classes, or like classes that were kind of a little bit more mainstream, you don't get as much of that. You got a little bit of it. You get like the maybe if you go to college, but you don't get a lot more about, you'll have to do this for the workforce. You'll have to do this when you get a job. And so if you change the system to where everybody you look at on a K through 12 campus has to be college ready, and you got to treat them like that, I think the whole thing will be shifted on its head. The California Master Plan for Higher Education kind of is perpetuating that. I think it needs some changes. But currently, it's the top 10% of high school graduates are expected to be at the UC. Top 33% are expected to be at the CSU, and the bottom 67 are supposed to go to community college or otherwise. That's why our education system works that way. There's a set number of students that you're supposed to go to the UC, you're supposed to go to the CSU. Everybody else, figure it out.
At what age do you think that process of differentiating starts between who's going to college and who doesn't? Like when would you say, like right when we start kindergarten?
I think it depends on your school district. I know for a fact, interestingly enough, I know for a fact for the Redlands Unified School District, in the time of which I went through it, it was third grade. And that was when we a few things happened. The standardized testing was one of them. That we, started doing. I think that started in like second grade, actually. Like as soon as you're able to like read and write, they start testing you on stuff. But I don't know if you all had the GATE system, gifted and talented education. Third grade was when you learn who got into GATE and who didn't. And interestingly enough, and I might be taking too much space with this, both of my sisters were GATE students. And so as the baby, of course, my parents were like, you're going to be a GATE student too. I was not. And I remember that, like, getting the letter that said I'm not a GATE student. And my parents being like, what is wrong with you? But I like look, I mean, of course they weren't actually like, what is wrong with you? But, of course they felt some, you got a little energy. They felt some sort of way. Maybe, I've never been as academically capable as my sisters. Let me put it that way. My sisters are way better than me in the classroom. But I looked back very recently, actually, when I was writing this paper, as to how you get to be a GATE student. Part of it is standardized testing, but there is a requirement for a recommendation from your third grade.
Shut up. Oh my gosh, this is so deep. Oh my god, I did not realize that. Who was my third grade teacher? No, Michael, that is wild. Oh, that is so wild. I'm so sorry.
It's all good. It's all good. I think like there's a part of it where it's like, oh, test scores. It's like there's different. It's not like I think everybody had to get like a check from their teacher that like the stuff you're seeing is correct. But of course, there's like you have to look at their standardized test scores and et cetera, et cetera. And I've always been in the like the middle to high range, depending on the test.
The bubble.
I think students that are there. The bubble, literally the bubble. I think the students that are there have to get a teacher referral.
That's wild.
I'm actually gonna find the document.
That is so interesting.
I remember reading that for sure.
Oh my gosh, it is interesting. I think it's such like critical. I mean, every time during your academic experience, I feel like it's really critical as to, oh, we're getting an end. We have to go. But yeah, so I was going to go on a tangent, but I was just going to say that like so much of like people's identity is attached to or detached to the way that the education system treats them at, a given point or like throughout the whole process. And it's like, it could be, I don't know. It's just very disheartening often. And thanks for sharing this with us and coming up with such a great solution that, if implemented, would probably get a lot of people to avoid what you had to go through. So thanks, Michael.
I completely agree. Like I think a lot of young people shape their ambitions based off of the way their teachers treat them because of just how much time we spend in the classroom. So teachers should be nurturing that.
Yeah, that is very true. And then we get into we need to train our teachers and like, pay them more to actually put that care into the students that they're working with. But this is dense. This is dense stuff. And you start to realize that it's all kind of interconnected. And I often think about like my path was devised, I think my path is the exception, not the rule. I fully believe that. Not to say like I'm special, but more so to say that I think there's a lot of factors about me and my past and my family that made it so I was still able to be successful. But a lot of other students don't have those same, like you might look at me as an individual as a third grader and be like, he's not going to make it places. But did they know that, I had older sisters that were like passing with flying colors and parents who moved to the United States for education and were not going to let me fail. Not all students, have those kind of support structures around them in their family in order to succeed and still have that inspiration and get an F on the test and still, trying to find a way to persevere. And so part of it is thinking about how do we still put those structures in place for the students that don't already have it built into their lives from their personal relationships or familial relationships. Thanks y'all for listening.
And scene.
This was PolicyWise, an intergenerational podcast by Youth Leadership Institute focused on bringing young people into the policy conversation.
Don't forget to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at PolicyWisePod. If you have any questions or topics you'd like us to discuss, please slide into our DMs or send us an email at policywise@yli.org.
and stay tuned for upcoming episodes.